think that's it.
Not again.
I didn't expect such a warm reception.
Shouldn't the train be departing soon?
Hey guys, and welcome to my review of The Bouncer. Now, The Bouncer was released in late 2000 in Japan and early 2001 here in the US. It was made by Squaresoft and actually co-developed by Dream Factory, which is known for a lot of Squaresoft's PS1 fighting games, Tobal and Tobal 2, and more commonly Air Guys, God Bless the Ring. You know, that game you played just because Cloud was in it. And it was published by Squaresoft. This was a game that I was very, very excited for. It was actually the game I got for my birthday when I had rented a PlayStation 2. So after the rental period was over, I had to wait to play the game again for about 4 months and just kind of held on to it and reading through the manual and remembering the little bits that I had played through. So it was a pretty big deal for me back in the day, and I have a lot of fond memories of it, but it is a flawed game. This was to be Squaresoft's first game on the PlayStation 2, and being that they were coming off sort of the golden age for Squaresoft in the 90s, where they were the flawless kings of RPGs, and they had award-winning games in almost every single genre. They just kind of went nuts in the 90s. People were really looking forward to The Bouncer, not just as a game, but really as to be the first game to show what the next generation of consoles could do, especially graphically. A lot of games before it were good games, but a lot of early release games, like launch games, typically have less than 2 years of development time, sometimes less than a year of development time, so they really haven't gotten a handle on the technology yet. And The Bouncer was going to be the first game to really show us what the difference was going from Gen 5 to Gen 6. I still remember there being a big rush of previews, little snippets and screenshots and all kinds of speculation before the game was released. And sadly, the game ended up not living up to expectations, mostly because expectations for the game were really overblown. It was sort of a victim of all the press it got before its release and wasn't really given a fair shot. And I have to admit that I was part of that party. I was somewhat disappointed with the game, especially after being so excited to get it for my birthday, and it was just kind of an okay game. It was good, not great, but even I didn't really give it a fair shot at first, but over the years I've really come to enjoy it, and I'm amongst those fans who really would love to have seen a sequel for the game. So when reviewing The Bouncer, I really have to look into why opinions have changed over the years and how it became a victim of overblown expectations. The Bouncer tells the story of Sion Barsad, Volt Kruger, and Co. Lefo from a bar in the city of Edge attempting to rescue their friend Dominique from the mega corporation known as the Mikado Group, headed by the megalomaniac Durgan C. Mikado.
So be it. I'll show you how it feels to be utterly powerless. I will take on all three of you at once. I shall add another handicap as well.
And yes, you do have to pronounce the names that way when you're talking about The Bouncer, or you're not doing The Bouncer right. Basically, the Mikado Group is a less menacing and far less interesting Shinra, because Square, can't move past Final Fantasy VII ever. The story of The Bouncer is told through a series of action scenes followed by a cinematic and rinse and repeat. The whole idea behind The Bouncer was this marketing line of the playable action movie, and it reflects that both in its fairly generic summer blockbuster action movie plot and its deceivingly short runtime of around 2 hours. And yeah, I said 2 hours. The problem is that Squaresoft, while a developer and publisher of every genre under the sun, was primarily known for story-driven games, and the early publicity for the game made it seem more like a fusion of an action RPG with a typical beat-em-up, rather than just the straight action game that it really was. The larger issue is that at the time of its release, many of the publicized reviews either didn't acknowledge or underrepresented the fact that The Bouncer was actually intentionally short and was made to be replayed multiple times to get the entire story. Before each action sequence, you're given a chance to decide which of the three characters you're going to control in battle and which two the computer will control. And at one point, your choice actually determines which path in the story you take. They each have their own separate path off the main line, but it really only takes you maybe 20 minutes, 10 if you're really good, to get back onto the main path, and that's the only real deviation in the entire game. See, before each battle, there is a short loading screen. During that loading screen, you see a brief dialogue acting as a sort of quick snapshot into the backstory of whatever character you choose to play as. The issue is, if you choose to play as Sion one battle, and then you go play as Ko, and then you go back to playing as Sion, you just missed a section of Sion's backstory in that one loading screen where you're playing as Ko-Lefo. Therefore, the only way to get the entire story is to not switch between characters, but to play through the whole game through as one character, and then play through 2 more times as the other characters. A major problem is that not only is this not clearly indicated anywhere in the game, but the opposite is true. Constantly switching between characters is encouraged. What's more is that to get the true ending and unlock all the extra content, you need to play through a 4th time to max out all of your character's 3 stats. Sometimes this can even take a 5th playthrough if you didn't acquire enough bouncer points or experience points in the 4th run to max out everything, and I'll talk about how that can easily happen a little bit later. While this may sound tedious to some, you can actually skip any story sequences you've already seen, so it really doesn't take that long to do multiple playthroughs, even like a 4th or a 5th one. In fact, I recently did a run-through of the entire game, skipping every single story sequence and only doing the battle sections, and it took me a little over half an hour to beat the entire game. This does highlight one of the Bouncer's 2 biggest flaws, however. The game's main story is so focused on this single action-packed event that only the main antagonist, Duragon C. Mikado's, backstory is fully explored, while your 3 protagonists are left with only mild snippets of information that fails to flesh out their characters. Volt Kruger, I feel like, gets a little bit more backstory than the other 2, simply because his revolves a lot around a reoccurring villain, Echidna, whom you meet and you battle 2 or 3 times throughout the game. So it gets a little bit more, but it's still not fleshed out as well as it could have been, and you're missing a lot of stuff in his backstory during the loading screens. In fact, if you've never played through as Volt at all, you wouldn't realize that he has horns because he actually went to hell and came back. Sure, all the main characters have very distinct and interesting personalities, especially Ko-Lefo, he is the best, but the most interesting thing about all 3 of them is their backstories and the revelation that each of them is working at this bar to hide from their past and start a new, simpler life. The story that the Bouncer wants to tell doesn't fit in the form it wants to tell it in. It wants to be that 2-hour action movie that it was said to be. But to try and do that, it's compressing and cutting and pacing a much larger story to become that. The second enormous flaw is sadly the next most important aspect of the game, the gameplay. Basic character control is actually very smooth and expertly implemented. All 3 main characters have very different movesets, and tons of easily executed specials to unlock with experience points. It's a lot of fun, but where it falls flat is interaction with the environments. Most of the environments of the game are needlessly bland and devoid of things to interact with, while sections that are actually populated by objects are even more frustrating due to the lack of interaction. The best example is actually the very first fight in the game, where you're fighting in the bar. You really want to pick up a chair and bash someone over the head with it. You really want to knock someone into the table and have it crack underneath them and do extra damage. You really want to take a bottle or do this and do that, things that you naturally would want to do in that environment that is full of natural weapons, things that you would pick up and use in a fight. What's almost as bad is that Square tried to inject some RPG elements into the game but really fell short. Your characters start at rank E and move up through rank A, and then achieve rank S after you unlock everything. This is done through spending bouncer points, or experience points, between battles by unlocking special moves and upgrading your 3 main stats. That's all fine and dandy, but the game would be far more interesting if they'd actually taken the steps to incorporate item usage. Even basic things like health items, or speed or strength boosts, or breakable weapons that you pick up off of enemies. Some sort of item usage or a character customization, even like outfits or something like that, would have fleshed out the game and made it stand out more from its peers. The deeper issue with the experience system is in the bouncer points themselves. You earn points after each battle, but the amount is negligible unless you get the points in battle by finishing off an enemy. These points can be multiplied for huge points by finishing off enemies in a chain. The problem is that you only get these points by beating an enemy. So if you're fighting someone and beat them down to the point where they have one more hit to finish them off, and then someone else comes in, Ko comes flying through the screen and gets the final move before you do, you don't get the bouncer points. And the computer-controlled character will do this constantly. The problem is worse during your third playthrough if you play through in the manner that I suggested, playing through one character at a time. Because the character you're using on that third playthrough is going to be at the lowest level, while you previously leveled up the other two in your prior two playthroughs. So at the beginning of that third game, they're basically Super Saiyans running around destroying everything, while you're Yamcha struggling to grab what few bouncer points you can before your mighty companions finish everyone off. Another issue is in that same situation where the computer character finished someone off, you have completely lost those points, since points only go to the character you are currently controlling. You might think, oh, that's not too bad. I almost got the bouncer points for that guy, but the computer-controlled Vol Kruger came in and belly flopped him and took him out. Well, alright, then Volt got those points and I can upgrade him later. But no. If the person who finished off an enemy is not the player-controlled character, those bouncer points don't go to that character. They don't go anywhere. They're lost. Playing something like Sega's Yakuza series makes you realize how much the bouncer missed out on in environmental interaction and item usage and a proper leveling system for a game of its type. Where the bouncer really shines, though, is in presentation. At the time, it was second to none. Nothing else could touch it graphically. The graphics were far beyond anything else. The musical score, while nothing groundbreaking, was always good and appropriate for every single scene. And the voice acting was actually really well done, and this was a time when voice acting in games was still somewhat of a rare occurrence. The ability to skip cutscenes at will makes multiple playthroughs far less tedious than it could have been, and there's even a multiplayer mode when you can play up to four players in a brawl, get a bunch of unlockable characters. You can pretty much be anyone in the game, even Sion's old master that you hear about. You can be Dominique, you can be Duragon, C. Mikado, you can be anybody. But while this is a fun distraction, it really is just a basic 4-player brawl. It's only fun for a few hours. And the last point of contention that could be, you could say it's good or bad, is while its short length can be viewed as a negative, it could be a positive. Sometimes you don't want to sit down and start a giant 30 to 100 hour long epic RPG, but you want something with a little more story than a typical fighting or racing or puzzle or whatever, casual game. And the bouncer kind of falls right in that middle ground where you can sit down and beat it after work before going to bed instead of watching TV. And I've probably done that myself maybe, probably might even be 20 times over the past 13 years that I've owned this game. The most frustrating thing about the bouncer isn't what it is, but what it could have been. The game constantly bombards you with the beginnings of fantastic ideas that aren't seen through. When it released, even I have to admit being frustrated with the game and being disappointed after being so excited to get it for my birthday. But the more time passes, the more I like it. I, and many other fans like me, can only dream about how amazing a sequel would have been that addressed the problems of the first game. The bouncer is flawed, but it's still fun, and that's what matters most.
The Bouncer!